morning and aloha. I am U.S. Congressman Ed Case, and I'm coming to you from my district office in downtown Honolulu. And mahalo for joining another one of my ongoing Talk Story with Congressman Ed Case events. This is my sixth overall one this year. I've done some specialty ones on areas such as small business and other areas, but this is my sixth to my general constituents. I did 5 straight in person throughout my district in April. Now we're doing a Teletalk Story meeting, which doesn't have the personal side, but certainly able to reach many, many more of you. My purpose here tonight is pretty straightforward. Number one, to report to you on what my activities are as your congressman, especially in Congress. Number two, to listen to your thoughts and concerns. And number three, to answer your questions. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of some logistics, cover some big picture issues, and then get to your questions. I am in my 9th year of representing Hawaii in the U.S. Congress, and my current district is Hawaii's 1st congressional district. From 02 to 07, I've represented proudly Hawaii's 2nd congressional, and since 2019, I've represented Hawaii's 1st congressional, and that is basically the city proper of Honolulu from Makapu'u Point in the east all the way through Honolulu up to Mililani Mauka, the boundary of Wahiawa, and then back down through the communities of Waipahu, Eva Beach, and out to the edge of Kapolei. And that is home to over 700,000 of my fellow constituents, our fellow constituents. Half of the state of Hawaii is my district. We definitely work through districts, but frankly, as the Hawaii congressional delegation has always worked, we represent all of the state, all of us. And so I don't stop at district lines when I start, working for you in Congress, and neither does my current partner in the U.S. House, Representative Tokuda. We're in this for Hawaii. We are halfway through now the first year in a 2-year Congress. Each one of our Congresses runs for 2 years. We're in the 118th Congress, meaning the 118th time that our country has had a Congress, dating way back to our founding. So this is a good time with all that's going on in our Hawaii and country and world, good and even critical time to check in with you again and report to you and listen to what's on your minds. Let me cover some logistics. This is, of course, live by phone. We're also on Facebook Live at Rev Ed Case if you want to watch this in person. And you can also do that off of my website at case.house.gov/live/. case.house.gov/live/. I'm going to report to you for about 30, 40 minutes, I hope no longer than that, and then turn this over to you for your questions. And so this is how to ask me questions. First of all, if you're on the phone right now, push *3, and someone will pick up your question and relay it to me. If you're on case.house.gov/live/, then just click the links here, enter your name, and type in your question. And if you're on Facebook Live, just put your questions or comments in the chat, and somebody will get them to me. In past Talk Stories, I've tried to turn this over to you to ask your question personally, but to be honest, I just get so many questions that it's difficult to do it that way. And so I'm going to read the questions, and I'll just work through the questions as you presented them to me. If you're disconnected, then you can call back in at 855-274-9528. 855-274-9528. We're going to have to end no later than about 7:40 because we have this for 1.5 hours. Any information or questions, check out case.house.gov. That's my website, or call 808-650-6688. That's my district office here in Honolulu, and we have folks in tonight to answer any of your questions. Okay, those are the logistics. That's the big picture. I always like to start these with what I regard as my mission. If I condense everything down to what I'm supposed to be doing for you and for our Hawaiian country, what are those things? What is my core mission? Number one is what our U.S. Constitution says is my core mission, which is to contribute to national leadership for our country and our world on behalf of the district that I represent, on behalf of you, my constituents. The Constitution says I do that by voting in the United States House of Representatives. But of course, there's much more to my responsibilities than simply voting in the United States House, and we'll get into some of that. So that's number one. Number two is to make sure that our Hawaii out here in the middle of the Pacific Ocean is not neglected by our federal government, and that we're taking full advantage of the focus and the resources of our federal government on the concerns of our country. So that's helping our Hawaii in Washington, D.C. And then finally, equally important, my job and my goal and my mission is to help you with your individual concerns. That's a critical part of my mission. I devote a lot of my resources to helping you with those concerns. They tend to relate to federal government concerns and programs. For example, Veterans Affairs is a huge one where we help many veterans with their issues, benefits, questions, Social Security, federal income taxes, passports right now, which are a real problem to get on a timely basis. But I think if you simply have any question or concern and you're not sure where to go, you can certainly come to our office and to me, and we'll try to help you however we can, even if it's getting you to the right person in state or county government. So those are the three parts of my mission, and every day I spend trying to do as much as I can in each of those areas, leading our country, helping Hawaii, and helping you. I've got some great tools that I use, of course, to try to achieve my mission. Number one, of course, is my staff. I've got a great staff, both here in Washington, D.C., not here, but in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, where I have an office that you're always welcome to visit us at, and here in Honolulu as well. I also have my partners in government. I have my three colleagues in the Hawaii Congressional Delegation. I've now served almost 5 years with Senators Schatz and Hirono, who have been great partners, and we have a good rhythm going. And now, of course, 6 months of Representative Jill Takuda representing Hawaii's 2nd congressional district, and much of my effort has been focused on making sure she gets off to as fast a start as possible, which she has. And so she has become a valuable member of our delegation, and we all work together in Washington to try to achieve the results for our country and our Hawaii. Of course, the state government is critical because much of what I do in Washington to help Hawaii is actually carried out by our state government, and I have to be synced up with our state government at all times. And I have worked very hard over the last 6-7 months to get a good rhythm going with Governor Green and his administration, as well as our state legislature. I try to keep in touch with our state legislature. And similarly with our county government, I work closely with Mayor Blangiardi and his administration, as well as the Honolulu City Council. I don't technically represent the other counties of Hawaii, but we work together all of the time. And again, back to the concept of one Hawaii. Of course, back here in Hawaii, a lot of my work and my partners and the tools that I use are the outreach that I conduct, and the listening that I do to what your needs are. You are a critical part of my effort. And then in Congress, I work on a variety of areas to try to achieve what needs to be achieved. Those break down into committees in Congress, which is how we split up the subject matter. Kuleana, also caucuses, which are a collection of members of Congress to focus on a particular issue. And then finally, just relationships with my colleagues in Congress, which for a small state is really critical to have those relationships, those friendships, those developed shared experiences where you can simply ask somebody for help and they will help you, and vice versa. I'm on 2 principal committees. One is the Appropriations Committee, the oldest committee in Congress, and widely regarded as one of, if not the most important committee. I certainly think so, since I'm on it. I'm I'm in my 5th year on that committee. That committee is the funding committee. So all of the programs of government have to go through the Appropriations Committee. That gives me a broad range of areas to focus on for our federal government and state needs through to the Appropriations Committee. About a $1.7 trillion annual budget. We're right in the middle of our appropriations season right now, which is what I'm going to be walking back into when I return to Washington, D.C. On the Appropriations Committee, we split it up further into parts of the Appropriations Committee that take each part of government. I have two critical subcommittees out of the 12 total subcommittees. The first one is defense, which has all of our defense and intelligence community spending, which is more than half of our federal budget. I also have the Homeland Security Subcommittee, which, as it sounds, is all of the Department of Homeland Security with many critical areas, securing our borders, and the Coast Guard, and a variety of other areas covered under Homeland Security. I'm also on the Natural Resources Committee, which is responsible for all of our natural resources, as it sounds like, particular emphasis on issues having to do with climate change, and for me, a particular focus on our world's oceans, which are endangered and need our help. That committee also has Native Hawaiians, and I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our federal programs benefit the indigenous peoples of our country and of our state. Of many caucuses I'm on, the two I want to note are, number one, the Problem Solvers Caucus, which I'm vice chair of, and I'll come back to this later on, but this is a very interesting caucus that by rule must be composed of an equal number of Republicans and Democrats. We live by other rules which are designed to get us to focus on how to actually solve problems as opposed to yelling and screaming at each other. We have been very successful in various areas. For example, the bipartisan infrastructure package, which was one of our largest infrastructure packages in generations. I'll get back to that, as well as the debt ceiling that was just solved, taken out of crisis mode. An unnecessary crisis, by the way, but we had to face that a couple of months ago, and our problem solvers were very involved in trying to find the way out of that. I'm also founder and co-founder and co-chair of the Pacific Islands Caucus, which is a group of my colleagues, bipartisan Republicans and Democrats, who are focused on the Indo-Pacific overall and the Pacific Islands themselves. Of course, we are a Pacific Island state. We are part of the Pacific, and there are many, many challenges and opportunities for our country throughout the Pacific. Our caucus focuses on all of that, not only on behalf of the Pacific Islands and not only on behalf of our country, but on behalf of our state, because as we interact with the Pacific Islands and play host to so many organizations focused on the Pacific Islands, we also help our Hawaii with good, solid economic stabilizing jobs and funding. I have, of course, other partners. I stay very close to the administration, the cabinet, the members, the secretaries, the people that work in actually implementing our legal our congressional programs. Just last week, just as an example, I hosted here in Hawaii the regional administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, who is deeply involved in a number of fronts, including Red Hill, which I'll get to. Also, the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, who announced $3 billion of federal funding nationally for affordable housing and homelessness. Secretary Fudge is a former colleague of mine in the U.S. House. And then finally, we had the Deputy Secretary of Defense here for 2 days, Secretary Hicks, who I know and have worked with, and she was here to focus very much on the Indo-Pacific, on Red Hill, on the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, and others. And so these relationships are critical to me trying to do my job. Okay, so those are some logistics, some big picture areas. Now what I'd like to do is just give you 5 or 6 issues that I wanted to cover with you up front before I got to your questions. These are issues that I believe are some of the more critical issues that I'm facing, and what you believe are some of the more critical issues we're facing. This I know from simply the correspondence in my office, as well as surveys that I send out from time to time to ask you what you think. And so I could easily talk probably about 100 issues. That would take us a very long time. Just because I am not mentioning an issue here doesn't mean I don't think it's critical. It's just that these are the areas that I think are particularly relevant to cover with you up front. The number one is appropriations, because the bottom line is that all of our federal government efforts need some form of funding, whether it's environmental protection or affordable housing or Red Hill or economic development or assisting education or social safety net and on and on. These all need federal funding. That all goes through the Appropriations Committee every year, once a year. And so every single year I go through a very defined cycle, which starts way before the commencement of the next fiscal year. In fact, almost a year before the commencement of the next fiscal year, to work through what the needs are in Hawaii, what the programs are, and then how I can get those programs funded in a way that's actually going to be responsible and take care of not only our country's needs, but our needs here in Hawaii. You can see a lot of information on my appropriations work on my website at case.house.gov, where I try to summarize each of the 12 appropriations bills as they are considered in my appropriations committee. We're about halfway through our work right now, and we've already covered some really major areas to include our defense spending in Hawaii, which of course is our number 2 economic foundation after tourism, so that's critical, but really across the board. So that's appropriations, and I need to highlight that every single time because that's the bread and butter of my job. I spend a vast amount of my time and my staff's time in getting that right every year, working with my colleagues in the federal delegation, as well as our partners back at home and our colleagues. Number 2, our economy, our cost of living, our inflation. It's hard to kind of treat them as different topics. They're all kind of wrapped up in, I think we would all agree are just a general uneasiness and concern still, even though we have seen in the last months, half a year or so, some promising signs as we have firmly come out of COVID, at least on the economic side. Of course, we're not out of COVID from a public health perspective, and we need to be vigilant. But certainly, we have recovered from an economic perspective from much of COVID. Also, the inflation that came after COVID and was caused in part by the federal funding that we needed to put into our communities to really get us through COVID, which caused a great amount of money to be out there in the communities throughout our country at a time when our supply chains were disrupted. And when demand came back for those products, it created an imbalance between what was available and what people wanted. And that caused inflation. It was aggravated by other factors, for example, the war in Ukraine. But that was fundamentally what happened. And that's very, very painful to get out of once you're into it. We've managed, I think, to dig ourselves a fair bit of the ways out of this puka that we have been in for a couple of years. We've seen some promising signs over the last couple of months. We see job growth up more than expected across our country. We see unemployment figures come way, way down. Hawaii, again, has some of the lowest unemployment figures in the country. And we've even seen inflation itself come down from the rates that it was at a year ago. We're starting to come down to some more normal levels. Of course, that doesn't mean prices are lower because we still have that growth in prices. So we're still trying to work through the higher prices that we see in many parts of our communities, especially in food. We've seen some reductions in energy, but we're going to have to stay the course in terms of what we are trying to do in the area of improving our economy and addressing inflation as we go into the next couple of months. And we need to do a couple of things to do that. I think, first of all, we definitely need to continue to work on our supply chains, which are not all the way back to where they need to be in a post-COVID world. We are still seeing dislocations that are causing scarcity of goods and primarily of goods that are causing inflation. And we need to be really, really careful on our federal spending because while sometimes I hear people say, well, we should just throw some more money at it, that's actually not the solution if you're trying to get inflation under control. What you want to do is be very careful with the amount of federal money that you have out there and keep it in a reasonable balance with the other economic factors. So I'm not going to sit here and say everything's cool. You know, that's not right. I know that's not right. But I think we're on the right track. And I think we just need to kind of continue to work our way through a difficult time. Related to that, we have passed in the last 2 years two huge federal generational reinvestments in our infrastructure. The first was the bipartisan infrastructure plan that I was deeply involved in that passed about 20 months ago. And that was a generational investment in really revitalizing our basic infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our sewers, our schools, our broadband, so many areas that we know need to be upgraded throughout our Hawaii and throughout our country. That was a $1 trillion bill that will provide funding to our states and our counties and our communities over that time to try to revitalize that infrastructure. The second huge bill was the Inflation Reduction Act, which was passed about 11 months ago now, and is really just starting to be rolled out and take hold. And that similarly was a generational investment, particularly focused on the effects of climate change. How can we change our energy policy? How can we incentivize a move away from fossil fuels? How can we handle the effects, for example, here in Hawaii of sea level rise on things like roads along our coasts? These are all areas that the Inflation Reduction Act was focused on. And these two bills are huge. And I voted for them, I support them, but they're only going to be as good as our ability to understand them and to take full advantage of them. And that takes a lot of coordination between our federal government and our state and county government partners and our communities as well, so that Hawaii is able to take care of our generational issues, again, whether it's our roads or our harbors or our airports, any number of things that can benefit by this reinvestment. We have already seen from these two bills somewhere in the range of $2 billion committed to or already in Hawaii for these purposes. And we can expect billions more if we play our cards right. So a lot of my time has been spent in making sure that especially my state and county government partners understand these bills and are able to apply for the monies that are available and to pursue them. And I think that if we all do that, we're going to be in a very, very good place to take full advantage of them. Next, Red Hill. No one issue has taken more of my time over the last several years than Red Hill, as it should, ever since the leaks of years back. And that has been a constant effort on a lot of different fronts. A quick status report, which I think most people are familiar with. Of course, our goal is number one, to make sure that any contamination of our aquifer is completely removed, number one. Number two, certainly to prevent that from happening again. Number three, to defuel and close Red Hill, which is what your congressional delegation asked for and the Secretary of Defense ordered a few years back. And then number four, and critically, addressing any current and or long-term health implications to those exposed to the contamination from the Red Hill aquifer. The status is pretty positive right now in terms of the effort to defuel and close Red Hill. The Joint Task Force, which is a Department of Defense-wide effort, has been focused on this for quite a while now, and believe that they are going to commence the active defueling of the fuel that's in there right now in October. And they're hopeful that they can finish defueling most of the fuel by January of next year, January or February, depending on how it goes. Now, it's not going to be all of the fuel, because most of the fuel, 98% or so, is going to come out simply by turning on the pipes and gravity feeding the fuel from where it is down to Pearl Harbor, where tankers will take it elsewhere in the world to be used by our military. That's going to leave some fuel there that needs a little bit more careful attention to get it out, together with residue at the bottom of tanks. So that's going to take a little longer. But the point here is that as long as they can get the final approvals that they need from the State Department of Health as well as the Environmental Protection Agency, and as long as they can stay on track, and I think they are on track, we can finally expect Red Hill to be defueled within the next year. And the next goal, of course, is to decide what to do with Red Hill post that. That decision is outstanding right now. The military has taken a lot of comments from a lot of people on ideas and owes a report back to everybody on their recommendations. But the point is that that is an area that we're going to have to sort out. Frankly, people ask me what I think, and I tell them I'm not focused on that right now. I'm other than to be focused on the use not being at all for fuel storage any longer, and I don't think there's any question that it is not going to be used for fuel storage any longer. So, what other uses might it be put to? That's the question that we're going through right now. We also need, again, to provide full access to the best medical care possible for those that feel that they are suffering still from exposure to the contamination at Red Hill, as well as to track long-term health implications that may not be obvious right now. We have succeeded in requiring all of that by legislation, and also have recently introduced a bill really to solidify all of that. This was Senator Schatz leading a bill in the Senate, and I co-sponsored it over on the House. Long-term effects of any Red Hill fuel exposure. And finally, just accountability, because at the end of the day, there does have to be accountability. We have to understand exactly why this happened and affix accountability for the fact that it did happen. There are several reviews going on right now. It's out there that I and my colleagues in the delegation required by law and that the Department of Defense undertook. Those will all be being completed in the next months and years, and we will eventually, I think, identify full responsibility and accountability. But for now, it's totally about defueling and closing and handling healthcare implications. This all takes money, and my focus in appropriations for the last 2 years has been on making sure that that money is available. We have now appropriated about $2.1 billion for all of this, and the bill that we just passed out of my appropriations committee adds another $100 million in the upcoming fiscal year. So I think Red Hill is moving in a positive direction, but vigilance is an everyday thing with Red Hill, and assistance wherever I can. A couple more issues: crime and public safety, which has been on so many people's minds here in Hawaii, with some high-profile violent crimes, very unfortunate and tragic over the last months. The reality is that our stats remain lower from a violent crime perspective and have even declined over the last year on a national basis. Of course, that's no comfort when these crimes are occurring in communities and are shocking all of us. Property crimes continue to be about standard for the country and a little higher than we want them to be. And both of these are aggravated in many cases by situations such as more fentanyl in our communities, where we have to take different approaches from a law enforcement perspective. But the bottom line is that for all of these crimes, the answer, besides all of our vigilance, is just making sure that we are fully supporting our law enforcement community and the tools that they need to be able to prevent and combat crime. Where I enter into this picture is, again, through appropriations, because we have many federal programs that directly fund these efforts by our local law enforcement, from high-intensity drug trafficking area, or HIDTA, enforcement to fentanyl-specific prevention and detection and enforcement, to community policing, which is more about having our police out in our communities, being visible and deterring crime. We also, of course, throughout our country, continue to suffer from the incredibly tragic effects of what is truly a pandemic of firearms violence. That is nothing short of, as I've already said it, tragic, with incredible loss of life continuing. I am sympathetic to the rights of citizens to bear arms reasonably and for their own uses, recreational uses, but I do believe that what we have today is out of control. And so I have very much supported legislation in Congress to do some of the basics, like make sure that criminals don't get to own guns, that we have effective background checks, that we don't tolerate the presence in our communities on a high volume basis, way distributed throughout the communities, of assault rifles and weapons that have no purpose other than mass killing. And it's a tragedy to me that we haven't all come together to do what the rest of the world has done for the most part, which is to reasonably regulate those firearms and reasonably find a way for people to be able to enjoy responsible firearms ownership without taking the risks that we're taking right now with our communities throughout the country. So this is clearly unfinished business. I sure hope we can get this done, because every day that I wake up and see another mass shooting is a really bad day for our country. And finally, political division and polarization, which underlines all of this. At the end of the day, I believe that what you want is for your Congress, your representatives, to simply solve problems, not to worsen problems. I don't think you want me to yell and scream all the time. I don't think you want me to be anything but constructive in terms of how I approach issues. Sure, they're divisive issues. Sure, they're tough to resolve. But I think in many cases, you actually can find a solution that is acceptable to most people. Instead, what we have is really the extremes of our political spectrum, yelling and screaming at each other and dominating the media. My experience in Congress is a little different. Sure, that's there in Congress, but there are plenty of opportunities to work with your colleagues. If your attitude is that everybody has a right to express their thoughts, everybody has a right to position, and where can you line up a solution with what they think is a solution, and come up with something that will actually work for the American people. And this is not something that happens naturally in today's world. You have to work at it. That's why I think my Problem Solvers Caucus is so important, because that's one of the few areas in Congress that systematically tries to do that. We try to solve the toughest problems. We've already taken on infrastructure, which was dead in the water for years. We've done some successful work in firearms regulation. We've definitely were deeply involved in the debt ceiling some months ago. And so these are areas that are constructive, because I don't want you to get the idea that it's all doom and gloom in Congress. It's tough up there, so don't get me wrong, but there are opportunities for us to chart a better course forward for our country. And I think we have to. I just sent out a newsletter to you on July 4th, and I reflected on democracy, and I said it's resilient, but it's not invincible. And it takes effort by each one of us. And I think we have to ask ourselves what each one of us owes to a better political system. All right. This is to Druella from Honolulu. Asks about the new gun law, the current law, 18 years or older, that they cannot own a gun on the mainland. I want to know more about it. Can you help me with this? I'm not positive whether that is the federal law that we passed last year, or that may be some state laws. I think it probably is referring to the federal law that we did manage to pass. This was what I was referring to earlier in my Problem Solvers Caucus work on firearms regulation. I don't think there is an outright limitation to owning at 18 years old. I think what it does is impose some additional conditions on gun ownership at that level of age. But I'm happy to try to help you out. What I have your phone number here, but if you can email me at ed.case@mail.house.gov, we'll try to get you the full information on that. Okay, William, who I happen to know is in Hawaii Kai, the deficit and the debt. How much deficit will we have this year? How much will we add, and how much longer can we keep this up? Well, first of all, our total debt, so the total amount owed by our federal government is about $32 trillion right now, which of course is an all-time high. Our deficit this year, as I recall, is in the range of $1.3 trillion dollars, and so that means that we are going to add to our debt by about 1.3. The deficit is the annual difference between what's coming in and what's going out, and that's, if it's a deficit, then we're spending more than we're taking in, and we have been for some time. Now, some reasonable amount of debt and reasonable amount of deficit is not a bad thing. Most of us carry some level of debt, at least in our own personal and business lives. But you cannot be at these levels and not have it catch up with you. And in fact, I think it did catch up with us in part by the inflation that we saw and by many other dislocations that are going on in our economy right now. Our total debt, both as a total number and as a measure of our economy. So as compared to our total economy, this is sometimes expressed as debt to gross domestic product. So debt to GDP is one of the highest levels in our entire history. The only time it was surpassed was right during the time of World War II, which of course was when we had to borrow tremendous amounts of money to finance a world war that we had to fight. And we are on track now. We're right about at 100% of debt to GDP. So total debt is, almost equal to our gross domestic product right now. It is scheduled, if we don't do anything, to increase to the highest levels within about 5 or 7 years, and that's not acceptable. And that was part of the entire focus that we brought to the Problem Solvers Caucus when we talked about the debt ceiling, because, of course, that begged the issue: how much debt, how much of a deficit? We have not solved this problem yet. This has been one of my big disappointments in Congress, that everybody's running for the hills on debts and deficits and pretending that we don't have to worry about it. We definitely have to worry about this. It's a very obscure area that people don't want to pay attention to, and the effects of too much debt and too much deficit catch up with you by surprise in many ways. For example, today we are spending somewhere in the range of $400 billion a year simply on interest on our national debt. $400 billion by comparison is roughly 1/4 of our total federal budget spent on interest. Now that's a lot to be carried on interest, and it's increasing. So I really appreciate the question. First of all, we have some very hard decisions to make, and we're going to have to make them. Paul in Pearl City, are you taking care rail that we have here? I think, Paul, you're referring to Skyline that just opened. I definitely have been supporting rail. I'm a supporter of rail. I believe that our city really functionally cannot exist over the long term without some kind of a fixed mass transit system. We've chosen the rail system. We need to make it work. And so I was there on the opening of Skyline and joined everybody on that. And I actually went back last weekend to just do it on my own, which was a lot of fun, to be honest with you. So I think that's going to prove to be a real game changer for the city of Honolulu. and the island of Oahu. Over time, we're going to have to work through a lot of issues still. My contribution has been really to assure that federal funding for the rail, the contribution that the federal government agreed to make to the cost of constructing rail, that promise is honored. And so that's taken most of my time. The federal government contribution was about $1.5 billion, of which it's already paid about $750 million. And now that the rail is on a much better track, so to speak, from a financial and planning perspective, I think we can expect the federal government to start to release some of the additional monies to assist with rail. This is for William in Honolulu. Vietnam veteran has PTSD. He still needs to get his benefits and medical help situated. How can he get his disability benefits as he's tried for many years and gets no answer? This is exactly the kind of person that we want to help, William. One of my principal responsibilities, my kuleana, is to help our veterans. We have one of the largest veteran communities of any congressional district in the country, many, many veterans, and a very, very diverse veteran community as well. We have one of the highest levels of Native Hawaiian veterans, for example, of women veterans, and there are many, many issues that face our veterans, especially those that served in situations that cause PTSD and other diseases. And my experience is that too often our veterans don't know about the benefits that are available to them, and or simply by the condition that they're in, don't necessarily pursue them, resulting in many of the conditions worsening. What we want to do is to get our veterans into our system of veterans care as soon as possible. And my job is to make sure that they can get in as soon as possible. We've also had some huge new bills that are of assistance to our veterans, especially those exposed to toxic substances throughout our world. Agent Orange is the best example of that, but many other toxic substances, such as the burn pits of the Middle East throughout the wars there of the last 20 years. We passed a huge new bill called the PACT Act about a year ago, revolutionary bill that basically says that all you have to demonstrate to get care is that you serve there and you're suffering from this condition. You don't have to prove that there was a cause between, whether the actual burn pit exposure was the cause of your health. As long as you say you were there and you have this condition, it's going to be presumed that that's a service-connected disability, and the federal government will provide the benefits for that it should. So my challenge with veterans is to make sure that everybody knows about these benefits, and number two, to help people who are not quite sure how to go about getting them. So if you could please tell your Vietnam vet friend who is not getting answers, that we'll get him the answers or her the answers if they give us a call. We'll certainly try to help them. Nonita in Waipahu, why are we not giving preference to the U.S. vets for federal housing? They are all in the streets, and I know because I work for the housing department, so I see it all the time in our vets housing. I want to talk about the, let's see, okay. Is there a bill that you can take to the Congress to make sure we are taking care of them? First of all, we do give preference to our veterans in some of our housing programs. We have a program called Veteran Assisted Housing, or VASH, HUD-VASH, which is a program under which veterans with housing needs can get very specialized assistance that tries to equalize the cost of the rental with what they can afford through housing vouchers. And that's the principal area that we try to help our veterans. But we also have other housing programs that I try to fund through appropriations for veteran needs, including housing. We've actually seen, and this is somewhat good news, we've seen a reduction in our annual counts of of those that are without housing. So our point in time counts, which we conduct once a year, and we go out, and I've actually done it myself. I've joined them where you go out on one day and visit with, try to find people that are without housing and talk to them about their situation. These point in time counts, as they're called, have indicated a reduction in veterans that are homeless or without adequate housing, that are living on the streets or in very temporary housing. So it tells me that we're making some progress in terms of getting our veterans the help that they need. But again, even one veteran who's in that situation is one veteran too much. Again, if we can help you with any particular veterans or further information, especially as you do your own work in housing, give me an email at ed.case@mail.house.gov. Leslie, can you find out if there is federal funds to have more affordable housing in Hawaii? Well, the answer is yes. I talked about the bipartisan infrastructure package as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the announcement by Secretary Fudge of some $3 billion for assistance upcoming through the HUD department from those bills. It's up to us to go out there and get that money, which needs to be sought by our state and county government partners. So we're definitely trying to help with that. Joel, why was I not at the community meeting regarding affirmative action? Is this what the congressman's perspective on not attending the joint council? I don't know what meeting you're referring to, Joel. I get a lot of demands, or not demands, but requests to attend meetings. I don't exactly know what meeting you're referring to. I probably was simply not here. It's probably in DC or elsewhere, because that would have been an important meeting for me, or at least my staff, to be present at. But let me find out if you can email me the specifics. I'll try to answer your question. Okay, I'm switching now to online question and answers from Facebook and other places. Let's see. Jax, what is the status of the student loan forgiveness plan? Of course, this was the subject of a Supreme Court decision which struck down President Biden's plan to forgive student debt. President Biden came back literally that day offering another plan to help folks that have crushing levels of student debt. Those plans are still being put together, but bottom line is they're trying to ease the, as I think they should, the immediacy of high interest of payments imminently, and try to allow people to find a way to accommodate them in a way that is going to pass a Supreme Court muster. But I think it's fair to say that the details are still, being developed. It's a work in progress. I hope, will respond to the Supreme Court's ruling, because I believe that we definitely need to provide some level of reasonable student loan forgiveness, or at least assistance. So that's definitely on my agenda. Two questions here on the Supreme Court. One, how can we correct the zealotry that we're seeing on the Supreme Court? And what are the chances for reforming the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court is a product of nominations and confirmations in the Senate, and as President Obama once said, results matter of elections, and that is clearly a result of some of past elections. Is what we're seeing on the Supreme Court today. I don't agree with several of the decisions that the Supreme Court has come out with in the last couple of months, and certainly the last year. I don't think that it represents really mainstream thinking in our country. And I do agree with some of their decisions. So I'm not going to paint the entire Supreme Court one way or the other. And I think that they probably are, each of them and collectively, trying to do what they view as their job. But as we've seen, there's a lot of thought that can come to the Supreme Court, and results matter. I don't think that we can or should reform the Supreme Court. I don't agree with proposals to pack the court with more justices just to change the dynamic on the court. I think over the long term we see ebbs and flows in judicial thinking, just as we do in our political thought. And I have to believe that the Supreme Court is going to change itself over time. I'm not going to be under any illusions. The current court is one that concerns me. We also, of course, have Congress, which is responsible for legislating, and several of the decisions that the Supreme Court has come out with are open to Congress correcting within the bounds of our Constitution, and so we have a role in this too. Donna, why didn't the Problem Solvers Caucus do more during the debt ceiling deliberations? Why wasn't the framework more widely publicized? We were very deeply involved in the debt ceiling deliberations. We, by definition almost, do not seek the spotlight. We're not trying to be, glamour boys and girls out there getting the headlines. We're trying to solve problems. What we did in this particular situation was sit down among ourselves and see if we could agree on a solution to the debt ceiling dilemma. And if we could agree among ourselves, R's and D's, and they were very, very difficult discussions. I was vice chair, or I should say co-chair, of the Democratic side of those negotiations. They were tough, but we came out with a framework, and then we gave the framework to other people, the president, the leaders in the Senate and the House, and they pretty much followed that framework as it turned out. And so you don't have to get credit for something just to make a difference, and we feel that if we're all out there grandstanding, we're not going to get things done. So that was our approach. Foster, when will Congress address campaign finance reform, public funded elections, and a Senate term limits? While I'm a strong believer in campaign finance reform, publicly funded, I have supported publicly funded elections in my state legislative days. I introduced that bill. And I'm a very strong believer in what we call H.R. 1, which is the For the People Act, which has been introduced in the last couple of Congress and passed the House, which calls for wide-reaching reforms to our campaign finance or in our election system. Unfortunately, it didn't pass the Senate, but that's really what we need to do to really kind of return the responsibility of governing to where it needs to be, and to give the people a much broader input and influence to end things like dark money, which has polluted our campaign finance situation and has accounted for much of the dysfunction of Congress in the last decade or so. So there's a lot of, that's what we need to do. Now, are we going to do it? That's the question. That's part of your charge as well, to tell people like me that you want to get that done. John, there is early talk about a government shutdown because of the upcoming budget talks. Why can't both parties work in a bipartisan way? I'm a government employee and I worry about a furlough. I completely understand your statement. I came back to Congress in 2018 when we had a government shutdown that hurt many, many people. And I don't ever want to go back there again. Again, our appropriations committee is trying to get that done. Our problem solvers are certainly trying to make sure that we appropriate monies for our federal government in the upcoming fiscal year in time so that we don't have to face another furlough. But this is unfortunately an example of the dysfunction and division in Congress that in this particular case is driven by a very, very small number of very extreme members of Congress, nowhere near any kind of a plausible majority, but they feel that it's their way or the highway, no compromise, no prisoners, and they're going to shut government down. It's a tough one to work with when people feel that way that are sitting members of Congress. That's the reality we're facing. I hope and believe we're going to work ourselves through that, because another shutdown, another furlough is very destructive to our fabric, and we need to not go there. Rob, given that your focus is on the ocean and climate change, I want to know when we are going to help the people that are 57% away from poverty. Well, I guess, Rob, I think the first thing I would say to you is that I think that's a little unfair characterization. I do focus on the ocean and climate change, but it's not the only thing I focus on. If that's what you're stating, I focus across the board. I hope I've given some reflection of the areas that I do focus in. I think we spent a lot of time here talking about, housing and homelessness as an example. I've talked about my work in appropriations to support a social safety net that takes care of the people that you are referring to. And so I don't want you to get the wrong idea here, and I'm going to correct you if you do have that idea. We are actively helping people in need across a whole range of federal programs. And I'm very much a supporter of all of those programs and trying to make them work in DC and trying to fund them in DC. All right, that is all the time I have. I think I answered all but a few of the ones that came in. I really apologize to those of you that I didn't answer your question. Please email me at ed.case@mail.house.gov. And we will definitely try to answer your questions. If anything comes up after this that you want us to try to address, please, again, ed.case@mail.house.gov. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions that are going to come up. Again, please contact us. These are really important to me. I certainly plan on continuing to communicate with you in a variety of ways through e-newsletters, through mail, through a number of talk stories. I'll do more in-person talk stories through my district as well as teletalk stories by the end of this year. If you didn't get a chance to ask them, again, ed.case@mail.house.gov. And for everything about my office, or at least an entry point to my office, case.house.gov is about the best way. Or call me at my district office, talk to my staff at 808-650-6688. 808-650-6688. Thank you so much for a very fast-paced hour and a half. I hope this was educational. I hope that I fulfilled my mission of letting you know what I'm up to in DC, trying to listen to what's on your mind and answer some of your questions. I look forward to staying in touch, and I'm going to wrap this up and hit the airport for my red eye to DC. So aloha from downtown Honolulu. See you again soon. Mahalo.